Okay, but
I have
I have
trouble
trouble
with
with
sound.
sound.
I hear echo. Do you hear? Okay, that's good
No?
now. That's fine. I was hearing echo. Um, I want to comment on what you said as you opened, Rabbi Levitas, as you opened the conversation about the Shah, the gate. It reminded me of a talk I once gave on Ne'ilah. Uh, I asked the question, why are we calling the during Ne'ilah, at least in the Sephardic uh, tradition, we open the gates of the Hechal. Do you do it also? You open the doors of the ark? Okay. So I was asking myself, it hit me a couple of years ago. We are now at the moment where we say, we call it Ne'ilah, right? We lock the gates, and symbolically we open the gates. Why are we doing that? And um, I thought of it as almost like in the action movies, as the protagonist rolls under the doors the last minute before they shut down, they roll down, and you could manage to squeeze in. And so this is the kind of the feeling that we have on Ne'ilah, only that on Kippur the door never really locks. We think that this is the last moment, but there's always another chance. So it prompts us to muster all our courage at this moment, this before Ne'ilah, but then we don't give up even when we think that the doors are locked. So that's I think the idea of Shar, that they're always an open gate for us. It's a beautiful concept. Okay, so I wanted to talk today about the Akedah as the central theme in Rosh Hashanah liturgy. Um, the shofar, according to some tradition, is a reminder of the horns of the ram that Abraham brought as a sacrifice instead of Yitzhak. And it's a very powerful story, very powerful narrative. But I wanted to start by asking who uh, who do you think is missing from that narrative? When we go back to the biblical story, we know that God speaks to Abraham and tells him, "Please take your son, your beloved son, Yitzhak, and offer him to me as a sacrifice on the place that I will tell you." Then Abraham goes with his two servants, with Yitzhak. They walk for 3 days. We don't know that they had any conversation during those 3 days. And then they get near the mountains. Abraham takes the the knife, the slaughtering knife, and the fire. Yitzhak carries the firewood, and they ascend the mountain. And Yitzhak asks his father, "Here's the fire. Here's the wood. Where is the sacrificial lamb?" And Abraham answers, "God will choose his sacrificial lamb, my son." And they keep walking. And then God, the angel, calls Abraham and says, "Do not slaughter your child." So if we would have written that story, would we allow other voices to be heard, or would we allow some people to speak more during that story? I
Feel
would
free
like
to
to know.
unmute
Yeah.
yourselves. This is we're happy to be an interactive session, so feel free.
Uh, is someone missing from the story when you read it in the Torah? Someone we feel should be there.
Sarah.
Sarah's missing.
Yeah, I would have thought that Avraham, before doing such a thing, would go to Sarah and say, uh, "What do you think? This is what God wants me to do. It's your son. It's not only my son." But Sarah is not mentioned in the story at all. Um, who else is missing? Maybe not missing, but maybe not expressing himself or herself within that narrative. It's a very, very concise, very economic narrative. You realize that uh, for 3 days they're walking through the desert. We don't know what's happening with them. And then I don't even know if it's a desert. I just said desert. It says that they went from Elonei Mamre to Har Moriah. We don't know what kind of scenery they went through, um, but the only dialogue, so I'll say that the only dialogue between Yitzhak and Avraham are these words: "Where is the lamb?" And Avraham answers, "Elohim yireh lo aseh le'olah b'ni." God will choose his sacrificial lamb. So I want to share with you a poem, two poems that are used in the Sephardic tradition. One of them was written by a Sephardic poet. One of them was written by an Ashkenazi poet. And they approach the Akedah from different angles and give different voices to people in that story. They add to the biblical narrative. So here's the here's the first one. I'm going to share it. Oh, share, okay. For some reason, oh, I got it. Okay. So now I called this discussion the binding of Sarah, because I feel that the person who was really led to the altar, of course, Yitzhak is the korban, is the sacrifice, but Sarah, as you said, that she should have been mentioned. Maybe Sarah is the sacrifice. Um, but I'm going to start here. Here, I'm going to start halfway through my discussion, the way I put the sources. So here's how Sarah appears in the Midrash. אמר אברהם, מה אעשה? אם אגלה לשרה, נשים דעתן קלה עליהן בדבר קטן. So Abraham thought, after Hashem tells him to sacrifice Yitzhak, is if I tell Sarah, women are light-minded, and she would probably oppose it. If I do not tell her and kidnap the boy, she will kill herself when she will not find him. אמר לה, את יודעת, הנער הזה גדול ולא נחנך. He said, you know, this boy has already grown up, and he has not been educated yet. יש מקום אחד, רחוק ממנו מעט, ששם מחנכים את הנערים. There is a place not too far from here where young boys are educated. Let me take him there. And she answered, go in peace. So I think that's an interesting twist that the Midrash adds to the story. The author of that Midrash asked himself or herself, what happened with Sarah, right? So the author created a dialogue. Abraham comes to Sarah and says, no, Abraham first he deliberates. Says, I have to tell her, but I can't tell her the truth. If I take him and disappear, she will lose her mind. If I tell her what I'm going to do, she will oppose me. So what am I going to do? What is Abraham's conclusion according to this Midrash? What is the solution? I'll have to lie. I'm going to make up a story to let her take the boy away. Does he think that it's okay that to take the boy away without telling her? Or maybe he really thinks that what he's doing is the service of God. So when he says, I will take him to teach him the service of God, that in his mind is the right thing to say. And I also think that there is something strange about what Abraham tells her. There is a place where young boys are being educated. There's something strange with this statement, no? Don't you think? If we think about Abraham and Sarah as the founders of the Israelite faith thousands of years ago, and now Abraham comes and tells Sarah, there's a place for an academy for young Jews, young Hebrews, or what exactly is being taught there? He is the teacher. He is the master. It's there's an anachronism or an element which is incongruous here. It's as if the author of the Midrash says, we know that you're not telling her the truth. She should have known that you're not telling her the truth, but it goes by, it slips by, and he takes his son away. However, in the Sephardic poem that we read for Rosh Hashanah, written by Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel ibn Abbas, who lived between Spain, Iraq, and Morocco, we read this. Amar le Sarah, he told Sarah, your beloved Isaac has grown, but he has not learned the service of heaven. Let me go and teach him God's ways. She said, Amra lecha adon aval al tirhak. She said, go, master, but don't go too far. And he answered, have faith in God. So what is Abraham tell? Abraham tells Sarah the same thing as in the Midrash, but she replies differently. She doesn't say just go, it's okay. She says go, but don't go too far. What does that mean? Don't go too far. Keep him in my vicinity. Is it the physical distance, or it's the theological distance? Is she telling him, don't be a fanatic, don't do something which you are going to regret? Or does she feel that something is going to happen? We don't know. So we'll go back to the to that text, and I I want to read you for you a poem that was written by Rabbi Ephraim ben Yaakov of Bonn, Germany, in the 12th century, following the Crusades. And it's part of a much, much longer poem that speaks about, in alphabetical order, about the Akedah. So here's what the poet says. He quickly pinned him down with his knees, straining his arms mightily, and with steady arms he slaughtered him as prescribed by law. Beyadav emunah shehato betochen. So according to this midrash, or this poem, Avraham did slaughter Yitzhak. Have you ever heard this version of the story? Anyone? No, that's not the one we know, right? It's a different story. The dew of resurrection fell on him and he was revived. But lo and behold, Yitzhak is revived. Abraham seized him to slaughter him again. Abraham is not happy. I had to fulfill the mitzvah to slaughter Yitzhak, and he's still alive. And then a river of the angels' tears swept Yitzhak away to heaven. חטפו נחל דמעות גבוהים בעדן גן אלוהים. זך חשב, הילד איננו בחובה ואני אנה אני בא. The pure one thought, the child is gone because of my sins. What shall I do now? So we'll leave for a moment Sarah, and we look at Abraham. And according to this story, Abraham at Har HaMoriah is at the altar. He actually slaughtered Yitzhak, and when Yitzhak is being protected by the angels, Abraham is surprised and he says, I am guilty. I cannot sacrifice my child. What am I going to do next? How can we understand that? Where does this come from? Any thoughts? Why would the poet say that Abraham did slaughter Yitzhak, and Yitzhak was revived, but now he's protected by the angels? Where does this come from? That's not in the Torah, right? Yes, Rabbi?
Well, you talk about the context of being after the Crusades, where many parents had to, surrender to their children being slaughtered. And we're looking for some kind of spiritual framework to understand that.
Right, right. So it's true. The poem was written after the Crusades, and if I'm not mistaken, Rabbi Ephraim lost some of his family members during the Crusades. They had to justify what they went through, and they also had to face the narrative of Christianity, where the Jews are surrounded by images of the crucifix. There are or martyrs. The idea of martyrdom is very prevalent in Christianity, and in a way, Jews felt that they have to match the devotion of Christianity towards God. So they adopted the idea of martyrdom. Of course, they would not have done it on a voluntary basis, but when the the historical events put them at that point of you have to choose life or death. They chose death, not for themselves only, but for their children as well. There were cases where parents slaughtered their own children so they would not be taken away and converted to Christianity. So the poets or theologians had to come with alternative endings to the story of the Akedah to show that Yitzhak was sacrificed. And it's very probable, by the way, that there were actual discussions between Christian scholars and Jewish scholars. I know that probably when we think today, we tend to think of Rashi and the early sages in France and Germany, and somewhat like the Orthodox rabbis of today. I don't think so. I don't think that they would get along. If you would bring back Rashi and his descendants, and you bring him here to you bring him to New York, or you bring him to Israel, and you put them in a room with the leaders of the Orthodox community, there would be a lot of friction. There was it was a different world. And one of the things, so we wouldn't think of the leaders of the Orthodox community today being engaged in conversation with the theologians and the thinkers of the Christian world. But in medieval Europe, this was the case. There were a few scholars in each town. They were usually the small cluster of Jewish scholars and the head of monasteries and Max Bernard of Clairvaux and Abelard, Victor of Seigneur, and other people like that. And the rabbis were in conversation with them. There were polemics and there were dialogues. The Jews were familiar with Christian theology, and the fathers of the church were familiar with the Midrash and would borrow themes and ideas from the Midrash and incorporate them into their writings. So it's very probable that there was this derision, that the leaders of the church would reproach the Jews and say, our God died to redeem humanity, and you were and so many martyrs died throughout the ages, so many Christian martyrs at the heads of the Romans and later on, and you weren't able to bring one sacrifice, that of Yitzhak. So the rabbis had to create an alternative ending. Yitzhak was sacrificed. He did die on the altar, and Abraham did not use it as an excuse to acquit himself from the Akedah, but rather tried again, and he felt that it would be a sin for him not to sacrifice Yitzhak. I think it's quite an extreme interpretation and a bit shocking to think that this is how they perceive the Akedah, but in their context, it made sense.
Rabbi Vadia, also the
Yeah,
fact that the Paitan refers to Avraham as Zach, like he's the pure one, as
right,
if there's any question about the appropriateness of what he did, let me, rid
right,
your doubts right
right,
now.
exactly. He's Zach, he's pure, right. There's another interesting ending. I'm not going to share the screen. I could tell you this. It's easier and we can see people. Uh, have you ever heard the midrash that says that Yitzhak was 37 years old when during the Akedah, right? And you accept it? It makes sense. Is there anyone here to whom it doesn't make sense that it was 37? Maybe younger,
It makes sense that he was younger, but that
right?
the
And
37
it,
was
it would make sense for him to be younger, right? But not 37 years old. How do we get to 37 years old? Where did this number come from? It came from a very narrow reading of the text by a rabbi by the name of Abba Yosef ben Halafta, who decided at a certain point that he needs to fill in the gaps in the biblical narrative and to create the chronology of the Torah. So where you have dates and ages, fine. But if you don't have it, he will fill it in by making some calculations. So he said, I have three events that are written in the Torah, one after the other. They are juxtaposed, and that's the binding of Yitzhak, the Akedah, the notice about the birth of Rivka, and the death of Sarah. So we'll leave Rivka aside for a second. Sarah passed away when she was 127 years old. And since the story of her death is juxtaposed to the Akedah, the conclusion was that Sarah died immediately after the Akedah. So if she died at the age of 127 and she gave birth to Yitzhak when she was 90, then Yitzhak was 37 years at the time of the Akedah. But of course, this is based on a false assumption, and that is that the events that are mentioned in the Torah happened at the same time, just because they're written next to each other. But obviously, that's not the case. The author highlights important events. If the author tells us the story of Abraham, who lived 175 years, and of Sarah, who lived 127 years, obviously, he cannot give us all the important events in their lives. So some events are highlighted, among them the Akedah, and among them the death of Sarah. Maybe 30 years lapsed between them. And that is what the Ibn Ezra says. Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra, in his commentary, says that Yitzhak was probably 12 or 13. And I think that maybe he was maybe even younger. However, that juxtaposition and that idea that Sarah died right after the Akedah gave birth to more midrashic interpretation, which associated Sarah's death with the Akedah. She didn't just pass away after the Akedah, but she died as a result of the Akedah. How did this happen? As the Akedah was taking place, Sarah was, according to one midrash, was just sitting at home, and according to another one, she was standing on the roof, and the Satan opened a screen, FaceTime with Hara Moriah, and showed her what is happening in real time. Maybe that's the first Zoom encounter. So, and she sees that Abraham is about to slaughter her son, and she died. Parha nishmata, her soul left her body because of the fear. So maybe that midrash tells us that a little bit is the midrash is on Sarah's side, right? The rabbis say, there was a horrible thing to do, but later on, again in the same about the same time of Rabbi Ephraim of Bonn, whose poem we read before, there is an interpretation presented by an anonymous anthology called Da'at Zekenim Miba'alei HaTosafot, the grandchildren of Rashi in the 12th century, and they say that when Sarah heard that Yitzhak survived the Akedah, she thought that maybe she didn't deserve to offer sacrifice to God. And then she fell off the roof and died. And it's not clear if she fell off the roof out of confusion, or she fainted, or she committed suicide. It's almost to say that Sarah decided, I will bring a sacrifice instead of that sacrifice, which has been rejected. So the same concept of we have to make an alternative ending with a sacrifice being offered is there again. It's shocking, but the curious thing to me is nobody ever stopped to think, how can Sarah fall off the roof if she lived in a tent? But sometimes, when I talk to people about the midrashic interpretation, the fantastic stories that the rabbis added to the Torah, there's beauty there, but sometimes they are being taken to an extreme. Anyway, I want to leave Sarah aside for a moment, and those stories of how we have an alternative ending to the Akedah, and now go to a comparison between the two poems where Yitzhak does talk to his father. So, as I said, those two poems are read in the. I'm going to quote two poems which are read in the Sephardic tradition on Yom Kippur, which is, by the way, completely different than the Ashkenazi tradition. It's I can survive in an Ashkenazi shul any other day of the year, Shabbat, holidays, But when I was in yeshiva, and I was in the black hat yeshiva, they were very strict when I was young, and they said, Rosh Hashanah, you must stay in the yeshiva. It's beautiful, it's inspiring. You're going to love the tunes and the tradition. And I stayed, but after Rosh Hashanah, I went to the Rosh Hashiva and I said, okay, if you want me back in the yeshiva, you'll have to let me go home for Kippur. If not, you're not going to see me again. I cannot spend Kippur in the yeshiva, and that's what happened. And I think it would happen reversely as well. I think that the liturgy of Kippur is very powerful. The liturgy of the high holidays is very powerful, not only because of its content, but also because of our association, because of what we associate with it. We grow up with it. We hear it as children, still innocent, and then the sense of awe and inspiration of that day, and it accompanies us. So to switch traditions and hear it somewhere else in a different, just doesn't give you the same feeling. So I don't expect that when you would hear the chanting of these poems in my tradition, that would move you the same way that it moves me. But I think there is something there anyway. So there are two poems that speak about the Akedah and can be found in our tradition for the high holidays. One of them was written by a German poet, Rabbi Ephraim of Regensburg, in the 12th century, and another one was written by a Spanish Moroccan poet in more or less the same time, also the 12th century, and they come from completely different theologies. One of them is following the lines of what we just said, of trying to find sort of alternative ending to the Akedah and praising that experience, and the other one is I think the opposite. But I want to pause you for a second. Anyone has any questions of what I mentioned so far? But it's okay if people want to bring up a question or comments. If not, I'll continue. Okay, that's good. Because I know sometimes the delay on Zoom causes people that not to speak, because even when you have something to say and then there's a lag of 10 seconds, by the time you want to say it, we're moving on to the next.
I have the same problem with an Ashkenazi Yom Kippur.
Really? In what sense?
I can't stand it.
Oh, so you'll have to sit through it, I guess.
I can't sit through it. We have our own minyan.
Oh, okay. So that's another. I don't know. I mean, I confess that I love the liturgy of Yom Kippur, but the liturgy are specific piyutim poems that are chanted throughout the prayer. But I would admit also that sometimes the tefillah is so long and so repetitive that I say, okay, I could skip that. No, it's not. I'm not. And actually, before I move to the piyut, I'll tell you that one year on Yom Kippur, I actually I stopped the cantor before the Seder Avodah. Seder Avodah is a poetic description of the service of the Kohen in the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur, and it's very long, and most people don't understand a word of what's happening there. And I mean, there are inspiring pieces there also, but mainly it's about how he slaughtered the animals and sprinkled the blood, etc. And if you're a vegetarian, you would not feel very comfortable with it. And I think I was a vegetarian back then. Then I stopped. Now I'm a vegetarian again. In any case, I went up to the bima and I stopped the cantor before we started the Seder Avodah, which takes about an hour in our tradition. And I said to the community, I said, listen, we're going now to read Seder Avodah, which is a summary of the sacrifices the Kohen Gadol made on Rosh Hashanah, on Yom Kippur, in the Holy of Holies. You have the choice to stay here and follow along with the Siddur, with the cantor, or come downstairs with me. I'm going to give a class on the book of Yonah, which has a very interesting aspect of teshuvah and a dialogue with God and running away from God and all that. So, and I didn't know uh, it was extemporaneous. And part of it was because I tried to convince the board that this is something that we should do, and the board wasn't so sure about it. So, uh, after I said that, from the 150 people who were in the shul, 100 came downstairs with me, and 50 stayed with the cantor. And those who came downstairs said that it was the best Yom Kippur experience of their lives. And I'm not because, uh, and I probably they could have heard better classes, but just because some people only come to the synagogue on Yom Kippur and they sit there because they have to just fill in, check a little box in their to-do list. But this was an interaction and a learning experience that gave them something. However, um, you can imagine that what the board wanted was extra sitting there and filling the synagogue so you would feel good. So I totally identify with that. So anyway, I want to go to let's go to the poems, and I'll read to you the way they are being sung. Both of them are read in a melancholic, solemn tone. So here's
Rav Ovadia, at what point
yes.
exactly in the
Oh,
tefillah services are they being read?
okay. So the first poem, which was written by Rabbi Ephraim of Regensburg, is read every day during Selihot. We do Selihot for 40 days. We do Selihot for much longer period than the Ashkenazi community. Obviously, because we're greater sinners, because we eat legumes on Pesach, we do all kind of other things that are strange. So we have also to confess for our sins for a much longer period. In any case, that's when we read the first period. The second one is read uh, just before blowing the shofar. So you could say it's read at the height of the religious experience of Rosh Hashanah. You wait for that moment, and then it's quiet in the synagogue. And there are different traditions. Some people read each congregant reads one stanza. Some read it all together. In some communities, the cantor reads it. Uh, and I had cases where people were fighting over the rights to read it. There was I'll tell you the interesting incident that one of my very first roles as a young rabbi and a cantor, I was maybe 22, 23, uh, and I was like waiting with my talit, waiting to blow the shofar, and that was a synagogue where each one reads one stanza. That's why it's good to have a cantor. Uh, each one read one stanza, and there were two gentlemen who started together at the same stanza, and no one would give way to the other. They kept on like sort of their voices were fighting, and they were not great singers either. So at least if they could sing in unison, but no. Uh, and I remember sometimes I'm embarrassed that I even did that, but I turned around with the talit on me. I'm like in my early 20s, they're in their late 50s, and I yelled at them, and I said, shame on you. We're about to blow the shofar, and you're fighting over the right to to read it. I wouldn't do it today, don't worry. But I just really felt that it was embarrassing. We're missing the point. It's supposed to lead us, to elevate us for blowing the shofar. It's not about musical performance. Anyway, this is sort of Hatayani Maskirayom, and I'm confessing for my sins. Uh, then the other poem is read just before blowing the shofar. So let us look at the text of what is the dialogue, what happens between Abraham, Yitzhak, and Abraham. So here's uh, the poem is called "The Empty Nest." Im afes rova ken. It's based on a prophecy. I have the whole thing annotated, and I can send it to you later if you want to look at it. Uh, the whole poem describes the actions of Avraham and Yitzhak as done expeditiously. They run, they rush, they don't delay. They're very excited to do that. There's no second thoughts. They don't stop. Of course, everything is with great excitement, as we said, because of this theology of martyrdom is the most noble thing that one can aspire for. And here is the dialogue between Yitzhak and Abraham. ראה יחיד כי הוא עשה, נאם לאורו המנוסה. אבי אותי ככבש תעשה, לא תחמול ולא תכסה. בי חפץ ונכסוף, לבבי לא לחשוף. אם תמנעני סוף, רוחי ונשמתי אליו יאסוף. Would you like to hear it as we chant it? Okay. It might sound a little different, because it's the Mediterranean music with quarter tones. So bear with me. יחיד כי הוא עשה, נאם לאורו המנוסה. אבי אותי ככבש תעשה, לא תחמול ולא תכסה. בי חפץ ונכסוף, לבבי לא לחשוף. אם תמנעני סוף, רוחי ונשמתי אליו יאסוף. So that's how it's chanted. What does it mean? Yeah, maybe you read the translation, I'll read it. The only son, Yahid, realized that he is the lamb. He spoke to his father, who was being tested by God. Hora Menuseh, his father is going through the trial. He says, Father, slay me like a lamb. Have no mercy, and do not cover my blood. Yitzhak encourages Abraham to perform the Akedah, to perform the slaughtering, like a lamb. There's no more than a korban. Have no mercy. Maybe he feels that Abraham's mercy, or compassion and love for his child, are now being awakened, and he says, "Don't worry. Please calm down." We noted in another class that I had on the topic that in something very that I've never realized before in the biblical story, when Abraham goes with Yitzhak to the site of the Akedah, they have 3 items to carry: the wood, the firewood, the fire, and the knife. Abraham takes the knife and the fire, and he lets Yitzhak carry the wood. And why is that? I never thought of it, and I always find new things. And then I realized, even at that moment when Abraham is about to sacrifice his son, he still has this fatherly love, and he doesn't want his son to carry dangerous things. I'm not going to give him the knife and the fire to hold. Maybe he's hoping that he will be saved, or maybe it's a subconscious thought. We don't know. However, according to this poem, Yitzhak is the one who encourages his father, go ahead, do it. Have no mercy on me, and do not cover my blood. What is the meaning of do not cover my blood? We have to remember that all these words, we'll give them a lot of meanings, but part of it is the need of the poet to work the verses into the rhyme. Every ending of a stanza is a pasuk from the Torah, which is mentioned here in the footnotes, and he wants them to rhyme. So he finds something similar, but still there's a message here. Do not cover my blood. What is the meaning of this concept, to cover one's blood, in the Torah or in the Tanakh in general? The first time that covering one's blood is mentioned is where? Whose blood was first covered by
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel, right? Cain kills Abel, and then the earth swallows his brother's blood, and God says, "You will be cursed by the earth that covered for your brother's blood." And later on, we find that concept again and again. Do not cover for the blood of a murdered victim. Make sure that you do justice with the murderer. Uh, when we find a victim that we don't know who the killer was, a korban is brought to the to the riverbed, and they slaughter the calf and the heifer, and they say, "We did not shed this blood," and they let it wash away. So washing the blood away, covering for the blood, is associated with murder. Yes, someone. I can't see everyone, so if you want to speak, okay. So when Yitzhak tells his father, do not cover my blood," he tells him, "Don't worry, that's not murder. I know what you're thinking. It's okay. Go ahead and do it." And now he explains it. Bi hafetz v'nichsof, levavi lo lachasof. God wants me. God desires me. He wants me to expose my heart to him. There's a double entendre. Exposing my heart is both spiritual, pour your heart out to God, and also physical. The way of slaughtering korban was usually cutting through the chest, and in pagan tradition, removing the heart. Eleanor, you had a question? Yes.
It struck me that the midrash about Sarah and this midrash bring two family members who are on the verge of tragedy, really, to be comforting Abraham. So I don't know, it's just a thought I'm sharing.
Yeah.
So crazy, it's almost Rashi-esque that somehow they have to harmonize this text and make it okay.
Yes. Yes, it's such a painful story. It's Abraham, the very first midrash that we saw is deliberating, how am I going to break the news to Sarah? Can you imagine a mother who had a child in an older age? Even if she had the child at a younger age, she will be very attached to him. But we see Sarah in her early years, she's hovering over Yitzhak, she's protecting him, she's willing to drive away Ishmael so he wouldn't harm her son. What is she going to do now when she finds out that her son has disappeared, or that he's gone completely? I once did this I asked this question at a I did a bibliodrama session on the Akedah, and I asked my students in high school to play Yitzhak and Sarah, Avraham and Sarah, and I asked Avraham, I said, when now you go to the Akedah, but I want you to perform it, and I want you to come back and tell Sarah the truth. I want to see how this goes. So when Avraham comes back, and Sarah asks him, and where's the kid? Where's the boy? And she gets all nervous and hysterical. Says what? And he's like, oh, you what? And he's just like, he starts stuttering, and they say, he sort of slaughtered him. I gave him as a sacrifice, and he's just like yelling at him. Again, you're hearing voices. What is the matter with you? It was an interesting way, those kids interpreted the story, but completely different than, like you say now. Here in this rendition, the victim is comforting the perpetrator. But of course, those harsh words. But Abraham thinks that he's guided by the divine mandate. Jill, you had a question?
Yeah. So another way to look at it could be that Yitzhak was kind of basically calling Abraham's bluff. So he's saying, come on, it's good. Go ahead, do it. So basically making the implicit explicit. So he never actually told him, I'm about to slaughter you. He never actually said that, is implied. So he just brought it right out front, and he said, show the blood, don't hide it. Like,
Mm.
do you really have the guts to do this? I don't think so. So it's kind of like, a bad movie or something, where
Mm.
the person is pulling a gun and then they're like, shoot me, go ahead, shoot me,
Uh-huh.
and then they say that because they know the person won't. So that's just an idea.
Interesting. And it could have been, I would have accepted it, except for the context of the poem, that from the very beginning writes Sarah out. Sarah is not part of that poem, and the actions of Yitzhak and Abraham are described as done with great speed and energy. There's no delay. There's no questioning. Now, uh, going back to this,
Sorry, Rav Chaim.
yes.
Could it be that one of the reasons they did it so quickly without stopping is because they didn't want to be caught or have Sarah catch up with them? And but also, I just wanted to say that and I don't know where we're going here with this text, but the melody that you chanted these lines with sends a very different message, and I'm always taken by the story that the melody tells, and whether it is in tension with or in harmony with the story that the words tell. So maybe at some point you can comment on that.
Yes, definitely. Thank you for that. It's an important comment. So here, Yitzhak tells Abraham, God wants and desires me, and He wants me to expose my heart to Him. So Yitzhak fully accepts that fate. And he says this, even if you will withhold me from Him, at the end He will take my soul and spirit. So it's a theology. Yitzhak presents here a theology. We are all going to die. And God is the one who decides when we die. And if this is the case, why deny God what's His? It's a sort of a fatalist, determinist approach that is really scary. But this is how it is presented here in this poem. Maybe you think maybe I take it a little too far, but I go a little back and I'll show you the influence of Christianity in this poem. There's no question that it's a result of the environment where they lived. Here, when they walk towards the altar, we read this. He ran to the lad to bring him as a sacrifice. He crowned him with the wood, and the fire was his halo or his crown. So those two are clearly Christian images. He crowned him with firewood, and his fire, the crown of his God, was on his head. When you think of Jesus with the crown of thorns and the saints with a halo, you realize there is a dialogue here with Christianity saying we can also do it. We also did it. And to the question of how did what you Rabbi, what you said about what Sarah was thinking, right? They didn't want Sarah to catch them, right? Here, I wrote a piece called Sarah's Diaries, where I tried to imagine what happens when Sarah wakes up and that morning and she finds out that Abraham is gone, because he didn't tell her that he's going. So I'll just read to you this paragraph. That is when, but you know what? I'm not going to share it because then you could see it. I'm going to read. I'll just tell you what is this moment. So in my imagination, Sarah wakes up and she looks around in the house and she says, "Where's Abraham? Where is my son?" And some of the servants say, "Oh, he left early in the morning and he took some stuff." She goes to check. What did he take? He took the knife. He took the wood. And she thinks, "Oh, they went on a trip. They didn't ask me. I'm going to catch up with them, and I'm going to show Abraham what that you don't take my child away without telling me." And she doesn't think that this is what she's going to encounter until she gets to the foot of Mount Moriah and she sees the two servants, and they tell her, "Oh, they went up the mountain. They said they're going to bring a sacrifice." And then Sarah says, "But what about the lamb? Did you hunt anything? Did you bring a lamb?" They say, "No, they just the father and son." She looks at the mountain, it's sort of barren mountain. How is it going to capture an animal? she starts thinking maybe this is what's going to happen. So I'm going to read this, like I said, without sharing the screen. Let's see if I could do that. I finally came to myself. No, here, there's this thing, sorry. I should have known the moment he was gone, because otherwise, why would he disappear like that so early in the morning without even saying goodbye? My knees buckled, my heart sank, and for what seemed like eternity, I just stood there frozen, shaken, and unable to move, drained of energy, drained of life. I finally came to myself and started running up the mountain. I don't know how I found the strength. I guess it is mother's love. Climbing the mountain, sobbing and crying out my beloved child's name, I made it to the top, only to see my husband raising his knife-holding hand over the helpless tiny figure of my son, bound like an animal and lying on a layer of firewood. Yes, you read correctly. My husband, the father of my child, Abraham the prophet, defender of truth, an educator par excellence, was about to use his knife to take the life of another human being who was none other than my precious Yitzhak. I screamed his name one last time and blacked out. I'm trying to get back to you guys. Where am I? Okay. So that's what I'm thinking of. What if Sarah had followed them to the mountain, right? And of course, like if she says after she wakes up and Yitzhak tells her no, nothing happened, she goes back to, but she can never forget that moment, and she can never forgive Avraham. So this is where I think the other poem is taking us, that of Rabbi Yehuda Shmuel ibn Abbas. Now I'll share the screen with you. Sorry, I'm too many screens. This is here. Where is the text? Here. First of all, there are two. There is an addition to the question, the biblical question of Yitzhak, and I want to hear from you. What is that addition? Vayan Yitzhak. Avraham Yitzhak talks to his father. He says, "Aye Adoni se asher kahalacha, ha'at beyom ze datecha shocheach." Yitzhak spoke to his father and said, "My master, where is the lamb required by law? Are you today forgetting your religion?" And I think that the poet added this thing here, just like the statement of Sarah at the beginning of the poem, "Go, but don't go too far." Yitzhak is telling his father, "Are you forgetting your religion? Where is the lamb? I know that you're going to slaughter me. How can you reconcile that with your religion, with your faith?" So Avraham answers, they come and they build the altar. The name of the poem, by the way, is Oked v'hani'ikad v'hamizbeach. He who binds, he who was bound, and the altar. So very interesting, and that's the refrain of the poem. At the end of the stanza, that's what everybody answers. Oked v'hani'ikad v'hamizbeach. The poet was able to sort of shine the light on those two protagonists, on Oked v'Ani'akad, the father who binds the son who's being bound, and Mizbeah. The Mizbeah, the altar, is the representative of God. So an inanimate object that stands there ready to devour and consume Yitzhak. So it's God, Avraham, and Yitzhak. God is represented by the altar. And now I'm going to read those lines of that for me are the core of that poem, and that's when Yitzhak talks to his father. Sihu leimi ki sesona pana. Tell my mother that her joy has fled. Haben asher yaleda letish'im shana. The son she bore at 90, Haya le'esh ulma'achelet mana, has become fire, devoured by the knife. Ana imtzala menachem, Ana, where shall I seek comfort for her? Where? Tsar li le'em tivke v'tityapeach, I feel for my crying, weeping mother, or for my mother who is going to weep and cry. Mima'achelet yeheme midbari, my words cry out from the devouring knife. Nahadadavi vet ma'asari hazek, sharpen it, Father, and tighten my bonds. Ve'et yekad yekod bifsari, and as fire consumes my flesh, kach imcha hanishar me'afari, take with you the remnants of my ashes. Ve'emor lesara ze liyitzhak reach, and tell Sarah, this is the fragrance of Isaac. So again, here, Yitzhak talks to his father, but whereas in the other poem he says, go ahead, do it, have no fear, you're not a murderer, it's the right thing to do, I'm going to die anyway. Yitzhak here says, let's talk about Sarah for a second. It's not about me, it's about my mother. It's the same mother who is not mentioned in the biblical narrative that is mentioned here. And Yitzhak tells his father, it's in the plural, Sihu leimi, tell my father, tell my mother that her joy is gone. The son that she has at such an old age is now gone, killed by the fire, killed by the knife, really by my father. How can I comfort her? You're not going to comfort her, you're never going to see her again. Meaning, someone has to comfort her. She will weep, she will cry. You know what? He tells his father, take my ashes and give them to my mother. What is Yitzhak doing here in this dialogue with Avraham? What is he telling his father? What is he telling him? Jill, you have a...
Same idea. I dare you. Like he's calling his bluff. Is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, okay, he dares him, but not only dares him. I think that to add to this,
He's talking him out of it.
yes.
But
How
it's
is he
being
putting
very-
him out of it? What is the point? Where is he hammering at? At what point? What is he telling Abraham when he speaks about his mother, right? That has to be comforted. He tells him, yes,
Going to hurt your
yes,
He's
Shane,
bringing
and
her into the story.
he brings her into the story, and he tells Abraham, you are going to have to face the consequences. I'm going to die. I'm gone. I'm out of the picture. You're going to go back to mom. You're going to go back home. She will weep and she will cry and she will accuse you. And what do you have to show her? You took a child out of her house and you come back with a bag of ashes? I don't know how you could ever comfort her. He really makes Abraham think. Maybe he made him hesitate for a moment. I think that's the reason, because those psukim are so powerful, that in many Sephardic communities, even though there's a different tune for the beginning of the poem, or like I said, in the start of those fighting, aspiring cantors, who is going to sing that? When we get to those two stanzas, everybody falls quiet, and only the cantor reads them in a very solemn tune. And this is how it's being sung. It goes like that. You could hear Yitzhak talking to his father. Kisesona pana haben asher ילדה לתשעים שנה היה לשאול מחלת מנה ענה צלם מנחם אנה צרינן תבכה ותתייפח. At which point the community answers, עוקד והנעקד והמזבח. So, to your question, Rabbi Adina, on the music and the words, the music in that second poem is definitely conveying the feeling. There are different tunes for that song, for that poem, but I find this one to be most appropriate. And I don't know whether what was the original melody nigun, for the first poem that I chanted, could have had a different melody, and then later on, as it was borrowed and brought into the Sephardic tradition, it was retrofitted with this tune, not based on the content, but based on the perception of people of how they saw the Akedah. So I think that you're right. In a way, the tune of the first poem doesn't fit the content. It should have been sort of almost like, how, Amazing Grace, or Precious Day, or something, something like devotional like that, because we are going to meet our Creator. But the second one is. So to me, the interesting thing here about this poem is really reflective of the Sephardic theology that was created under the rule of Islam and not under Christianity. Is that there's interesting detail about this poem, the second one, the one written by the Spanish Moroccan poet. His son, later in life, the son of the poet, converted to Islam. So here you have the poem that is read just before blowing the shofar. It questions the Akedah. It casts doubt on what Abraham had to do. The son of the author has converted to Islam, and no one came and said, you know what, we think that this poem may not be appropriate for our community to read just before blowing the shofar. So, how are we to understand it? I think, first of all, it attests to the maybe the power of that poem. That once it was there, people couldn't depart with it. But I think it also sends that's to me the message that this poem sends on Rosh Hashanah, when we think of the Akedah, and I think that ties to the theme of Elul as a religious awakening, because very often we some people, no, I'm saying some people miss the focus of the religious experience. It becomes the synagogue, rituals, prayers, sort of a certain deal, that we have to cut with God. I'll do this for you, you'll do this for me. I know I have to follow certain rituals and check boxes, and everything will be okay. And some good people also fall into the trap of devotion when they decide this is what must be done in the name of Judaism, in the name of law, in the name of the Torah. And they sometimes fail to understand that their actions do not happen in a vacuum. So what Rabbi Yehuda ibn Abbas, this poet, what he does in creating this dialogue between Abraham and Yitzhak is telling everyone to think, when you're about to perform a religious act, when you are about to lead a certain life out of a religious conviction, who are you dragging? Who is involved and who is going to be impacted by your action? Is it only you? Are you really isolated? And not only religious acts, every act, but religious act we tend to justify, and we have the wide back of God and the Torah to protect us. That that's why we're doing it. And the poet says, no, you have to stop and think. Who is being? Where is your Sarah? Where is your Yitzhak? Where is you? Where are you, Abraham, going to be after the Akedah? How are you going to face reality? How are you going to face consequences? So I think in that sense, it's a very powerful story of Teshuvah that is not just the Teshuvah after the act, but a premeditated Teshuvah. Before you approach the act, before you do something, you stop and think, who is involved? Who is going to be bound by my act right now? So I hope that I did not, this was not too burdensome in terms of the thinking of that act. But for me, it's a really a very emotional, very powerful moment at the Tefillah of Rosh Hashanah, and I wanted to share it with you. So maybe we'll open up for questions or comments. I know that you have.
Yes, please feel free to unmute yourself and share.
How does Ishmael fit into all of this?
Not in the Jewish tradition, he doesn't. Not in the Torah.
But I mean, he was put out, and so basically you have one son that's put out, and then you have another son that he's told to kill. So I don't know. It's pretty remarkable.
Are you saying that the parenting advice of Bereshit is not the best? Yes, you're right. That I agree. I mean, the first example of bad parenting is given by God Himself when He rejects Cain and prefers Hevel, and then it ends with murder. But yes, Ishmael is being driven out of the house. Maybe maybe you want to read it as a punishment for Sarah. Maybe she wasn't so compassionate, so now she has to go. She go through this. It's very hard for me to understand the story because, be it as it may, whatever God wanted out of the story, there was one victim that probably never recovered, and that's Yitzhak. He had to be at a very tender age and completely oblivious to not carry with him some trauma from the Akedah, from being bound and being put there on the altar. And I'll share with this. Many years ago, one of my colleagues in a listserv that we had through the Luxstein Center in Israel posted a question of all educators and rabbis, and he said, my son asked me, 7 or 8 year old son asked him, Dad, what would you do if God asked you to slaughter me, to sacrifice me? And the rabbi said, I didn't know what to tell him. But we tell the story to children in elementary school, and what do we expect them to think? I see that you are muted, Leonard. Yes?
First of all, I'm someone who understands the stories of the Avot, the narratives of the Avot, as a foundational mythology. We'll just leave that in the background, okay? Foundational mythology.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been reading the narrative of the Akedah as an early manifestation of Judaism's commitment and foundational commitment and on justice, equity, rule of law, fairness, ethics, and morality. And I think we can keep in mind here, I mean, this isn't going to impact the poetry, the piyutim that you just shared with us. That's a different question. That has, I think, more to do with romanticism and not sentimentality, but emotionalism. But looking at the story itself, I think what we have to understand is that in the days before Judaism, in the days that are attributed to this character Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yosef, the tribes, that the sacrifice of the firstborn child was a very common phenomenon among the religions, among the pagan religions of the Near East. And we have archaeological support for that in bodies of children that are buried and in the foundations of houses from that time, 1,000, 2,000, even later, and from pagan societies. And I read the story, the narrative of the Akedah, as essentially a moral, ethical command from God, who to me embodies the law and equity, and fairness, and justice, etc. Don't do this anymore, my people. Do not even think about sacrificing your children. And then it's actually embodied in the Torah when it talks about, was it lo titei bitcha the Molech, right? Molech. What was Molech? Molech is understood, and we know this also from archaeological and documentary evidence from that early classical period, that early period. Molech was a god to whom pagans of that area sacrificed their children, sacrificed their firstborn, because it was the most valuable possession, and this is how you appease God. And so when I read the story of the Akedah, I read it as an injunction, a remonstrance. Don't even think about doing this.
Yeah, thank you so much. I totally agree with that. And the romanticism is really anchored in reality, because when we read those piyutim, and that was important for me to point out, they reflect a reality of the Jewish communities of Spain and Germany. The result was, because of this theology, that when Jews in Germany faced a coerced conversion or a threat thereof, they decided to die and to kill their children. And when Jews in Spain faced it, they decided to convert and live in hiding or flee, for which they were rebuked by later historians up until the 20th century. Also, the human sacrifices continued in the area, and actually in the Phoenicians who built their colonies in North Africa and Carthage, or Cartagena, it continued up to the 9th century of the Common Era, so quite late. And of course, we know in the pre-Columbine culture in South America, just generally, human sacrifice continues. So I definitely agree that the story of the Torah in its core is a story about the rejection of idolatry, of human sacrifices, and but we have to admit that the biblical narrator did not take into account the role of Sarah in the story, right? The role of Yitzhak in the story, or how it will affect future generations. But already in the Tanakh, we have a commentary on the Akedah, very poignant commentary that people sometimes fail to see. And I said people who study Tanakh, and that's in the book of Micha, in Micah 6, chapter 6, verses 6 to 8. The prophet says, how would I appease God? Will I appease God by rams, by bulls, by rivers of oil? Should I sacrifice my child? Right? And the answer is no. No, you should not sacrifice your child. You know what God wants from you? 3 things. Asot mishpat, ve'avat hesed, ve'atznei alechet im Elohecha. Do justice, loving kindness, and walk humbly with God. Meaning, don't wear your religion on your sleeve. Keep your religion a private issue between you and God. So, but the amazing thing to me, and that's why what I want to point out, that people who studied and learned and wrote halakha for thousands of years ignored all this. They ignored the commentary of Micah. They ignored the cultural context. They ignored the end result of the Akedah, where Yitzhak does not die, and twisted it to fit their reality. And even though, thank God, we don't have human sacrifices today, right? But I can tell you from the work that I do within the Orthodox community, and a large part of what I do is I feel I'm helping victims of religious abuse, really, that come from indoctrination, from imposing religion, from instilling in children feelings of guilt and shame. The part of the mentality that leads parents to behave in that manner is the mentality of the Akedah. It's like you have to suffer for God. Or in Yiddish it's schwer ben a Yid. It's hard being a Jew. You have to sacrifice. You have to die a little bit to be there. Yes.
Rav Chaim, if I could just build on something you just said and ask you, the description that you gave, something that has touched me for many, many years, of the indifference of Avraham to the impact that his religious choices, sensing his call from God, his indifference to the impact of those choices upon other people in his life. Of course, on Yitzchak, but in the way you've described on Sarah too, the sort of horizontal relationships of people who coexist with you in your spaces. Maybe the way we would, speak about it tachlitically, people who share a home. If one person makes decisions around maybe wanting to become more strict in terms of their kashrut, or somebody else says, no, you know what, I'm ready to bring non-certified wine into my home, that these kinds of decisions impact other people and need to be, or what Shabbat looks like, changes in terms of observance of Shabbat. I mean, the sort of nafkamina, that's what we take away from all of this is, yes, as you say, to be mindful of how our choices impact the people we share our lives with on the horizontal level. But the poignancy of the two piyutim that you taught us, both complement each other in bringing out the vertical tension, which you just started to talk about, the vertical tension between generations, and how painful it is for so many of us in our families, for those of us who've been blessed to be parents, and for those of us who have had to come to terms with the different choices that we've made as children. Right, in the piyutim that you shared, either submitting to our parents' religious expectations of us if they're not consistent with who we are, or of parents trying to impose upon us, as you said, their religious beliefs, even though our path and our experience could be different. The vertical tensions that your piyutim tonight bring out, I think, are important for us to name, and particularly in this month of Elul, as we think deeply not only about our own relationship to tradition, but about our relationship to the people around us. It's another direction of the tensions and of the humility.
Yeah, it's true. Thank you. Thank you for that insight. I totally agree with that. Yes, Michael, you're still muted.
I'm sorry.
No,
So
go ahead.
it seems to me that the material that you read really represents a rejection of the choice made by the biblical writer for how to deal with the Akedah story. And by that I mean that if you read the beginning of the Akedah story, the first 8 verses, up to the point where Abraham raises his hand to slaughter his son, I think you understand intuitively that the original story was indeed the sacrifice, that he killed his son in the original story. Because after that, the language changes, all of a sudden an angel comes in. You could see that they were trying to deal with, how do we deal with the fact that God asked Abraham to slaughter his son? And the choice that they made was to say, this is a test. And I think many people have commented how unsatisfactory this choice really is, this explanation really is, because it really puts Abraham in a bad light. He failed that test, if you think about it. So I'm wondering how you feel about that choice. There are many ways that the biblical writer, assuming there was a biblical writer, could have gone here. He could have had Abraham say, no way, I'm not doing this. And there were several other choices that were more dignified for Abraham and who could have brought Sarah in as well. How do you feel about, do you think that the things that you read are a rejection of the interpretation, of the biblical interpretation?
So yeah, first of all, for sure there was a biblical writer. We just don't know who it was. But yeah, that's I know of this approach of saying that they're sort of like the story was modified. How would I? The question like how would I tell the story? I wouldn't choose to put the story at all there. But like Leonard said, maybe it was necessary for that generation to make such a bold statement. When we read the later books of the Tanakh, that I mean we assume they are later, but by the chronology of the period they describe, the books of Melachim, etc. But it could have been that this book was written later. We don't know. But we know that the books of Melachim, the book of Hosea, and others describe a reality where human sacrifices were happening. So that could have been the story was written in that manner. Uh, and then what you said also works into that. It's very possible that for some people who practiced child sacrifice, they had the story about the founder of the faith as someone who did that, and then the reformers who said, no, okay, enough with that, altered the story and put it there, so they couldn't take it out completely because people were already familiar with, just like the flood and other elements of Bereshit, like you called it the foundational mythology, or more than the mythology, we say it's the myth in the sense of an act that happens in the time before time, in the origins of the nation or the individual. So yes, it's a possibility that both powers play here. There's an ancient story about the founder of the faith which affirms what they're doing, and then a group of reformers comes in and alters the story, but cannot completely uproot it. It's a possibility.
Rabbi, could you explain? I didn't know. I mean, I know child sacrifice was big, but that how people would think if they sacrifice their child, then they don't have to convert. I don't know how that works or how it
No,
worked.
I don't know how it works either. I wrote somewhere else that child sacrifice is still practiced today, not to the same extent, not with the same brutality, but when you read about child abuse, or even parents who push their children to become professional athletes at and those children could suffer injuries, they could suffer. So it's not to that extreme, but somewhere like this is what
I'm just saying. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm just saying that you made a statement that during that time, in order to keep the religion, so that the parent wouldn't have to convert.
Oh, no. What I said was
That they, maybe I misheard. Okay.
no. What I
All right.
said was that the reformers wanted to stop people from bringing child sacrifices. So they changed the story, the ending of the story, to convince people, but they could not completely take the story out. So, like Michael mentioned, they just altered the end of the story where Abraham, instead of sacrificing his son, sacrificed a lamb. But I know that our time is over now, right?
Yes, but it's always a good sign when you leave people with more questions than answers. This has been a really rich and evocative journey through the Akedah, and thank you for bringing all those other voices to us in our dialogue, both internal and external, about this story. And Rav Chaim, always thank you for bringing your treasure of knowledge and your openness and the way you've shared with us. I want to invite everyone to join us again next week for our last Elul Shiur. Will be taught by Rachel Brody, who is the senior educator at the Jewish Studio Project in San Francisco. Her Shiur will focus on slichot and will do a deep analysis of the power of words in Jewish tradition and in human dynamics. There are lots of other wonderful things going on at Sha'ar. You all received a confirmation email which has my email in it. If you wish to be added to our mailing list, please feel free to just send me an email and we'll be happy to do so. We're going to end with Kaddish de Rabbanan. Before I chant that, before I offer that prayer, I want to just wish everybody a Shana Tova, a sweet and healthy and happy new year. May it be a year of new beginnings and redemption for all of us from this very difficult time that we've been living through. And feel very blessed for the strength of community and the strength of Torah to carry us through. So thank you, and I hope that we'll be together again soon.
Thank you.
יתגדל ויקדש שמי רבה, ביום תברח חירותי וימליך מלכותי בחיי חון וביום חון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל, בעגלה בזמן קריב אמרו אמן. אליה יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי לקודשה בריחו לעילוי כל ברכתה ושירתה תשבחתה ונחמתה דמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן. ישראל ועל רבנן ועל תלמידי הון ועל כל תלמידי הון ועל כל מאן דעוסקין באורייתא דיבה אתר הדין ודיבה בכל אתר ואתר יהי להון ולכון שלום רבה חינה וחיסדה ורחמין וחיינה רכינה מזנה רוויחה ופורקונה מן קודם ובוהן דבשמי ואמרו אמן. יהי שלום רבה מן שמי וחיים ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן. עשה שלום במרמיו ורחמיו יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ועל כל יושבי תבל ואמרו אמן. Shana Tov, everyone. Rav Chaim, thank you again. We'll see
you
you
so
back
much.
in our too soon. Shana Tova, everyone.
שנה טובה ומבורכת.
טובה.
להתראות.
שנה טובה.
שנה טובה.
See you next
שנה
time.
טובה.
תודה,
Thank you
לשנה
very
טובה.
much.
תודה, להתראות.
שנה טובה.
שנה טובה.
שנה טובה.
שנה טובה.
Shana Tov, everyone.
לילה טוב.